Christopher Bates, it is so wonderful to have you here on Fashion Talks. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure. And I know we'll get into because you're coming to us from Milano. So I love the internationalness of our conversation. Thanks for dealing with the time zones.
No problemo.
I love to start off with the same question, which I'm very excited for you to answer. Is I believe that all of us who have a love of fashion, who work in fashion, there is a moment, often when we're very young, when we understand that clothing, that fashion has a power beyond just protecting our bodies from the elements. And I'm wondering if there's one that stands out for you.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because I certainly had that moment. And for me, it was when I was young. I grew up in Vancouver, and this would be during the 80s. I was really into skateboarding, and my mom bought my brothers and I really cool clothes, Chip and Pepper, TNC Surf, lots of neon, and I just loved it. I was an energetic kid. I remember I never liked wearing pants. I would always wear shorts. Even if it was winter in Vancouver, it gets pretty cold. But I'd put on my favorite shorts. I'd run to school every day. And I just felt like, okay, I was in a good mood. Putting on an outfit that I liked made me in a better mood. It enhanced my mood. And I was aware of that even as a kid. I wanted to wear my favorite outfits all the time. So yeah, I loved clothes and I was creative. So I started sketching even back then when I was a kid, just ideas for logos and different pieces.
And it sounds like you had parents that didn't fight you if you wanted to wear something that made you feel good. Because I'm just thinking about, skateboarding was probably one of the things where I became aware of, streetwear and something that was very different from my small town Ontario growing up environment. And it was such a revelation in how different it was.
Yeah, and I would literally seek that out, like even from a young age. Like if everybody was wearing like blue jeans, I wouldn't want to. I always wanted to be an individual, so I would look for what's new. And yeah, and my mom definitely supported that. Like we'd go down to the States to go shopping because they had things we couldn't get here in Canada, and then we'd find like Stussy. Like I remember when that brand started, and they had all this crazy stuff. That was like one of the first streetwear brands, and it was good for a skater as well. So, yeah, that's how I grew up.
What kind of teenager were you as you were, because what I'm finding so fascinating as you're saying this is I hear you talking about Stussy and streetwear, which is so not the brand that you end up designing. So I'm curious about how that evolution happened.
That's yeah. As a teenager, I was fairly rambunctious and rebellious, but I sort of transitioned. I would say once I turned 16 to 17, I started to get a little bit more serious, and I was more interested in like business, for example. So yeah, I grew up. I matured starting around 16 or 17.
And when you say that, do you mean you started to look at creative things more seriously, or like what do you like? What was going on in your head when you say you were maturing, but still had this like understanding of the power of expression bubbling within you too?
Yeah, I guess that's when I was taking my career seriously. Like I was like thinking, okay, what university are you going to go to? What are you going to study in university? Like what do you want to do as a career? And this whole time, like I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I wasn't really into like fine arts. And growing up in Vancouver and in Canada in this period in the '90s, fashion was nowhere on the radar. I had no idea about that industry, and that was a career. I was thinking, okay, marketing was interesting to me because you had advertising, graphic design that appealed to me, architecture appealed to me a lot. So those were sort of realistic career choices at the time that I was considering. It wasn't until I was 17 when I graduated from high school, I did my first trip to Europe, and that was a game changer. That's when it really opened my eyes and my imagination, and this I became really inspired, by Europe and fashion and just everything about that new world for me.
What was it about Europe that appealed to you so much? Like, do you remember a scene or, something that just really sort of was that bolt of inspiration?
Yeah, it wasn't just one thing per se, but I remember being in Rome, on that first trip, and I was just taking pictures of everything because literally like the lamppost, would have design elements. It would have like a little, gargoyle head on the side, and it was so different from the architecture in North America, which is very sort of straightforward and functional. In Rome, everywhere I looked, there'd be like ruins, and even that was beautiful and stimulating. So that was one part of it. I would say the architecture and the art, the history was really stimulating. But then, yeah, the people's individual style as well, and that's something that really registered with me on future trips that I did. Still, in my early 20s, I remember being in Stockholm, and I would say that's where I had my eureka moment. Because the people there were just so stylish and they had so many creative things going on with their outfit and their look. I felt like they were light years ahead of Canada. And during this whole period, I had been keeping a sketchbook with ideas for designs and logos and things. And it was that moment. It was the summer of 2005 when I was in Stockholm, and I said, "These people would like my ideas." That's when I knew there was like a market out there for the concepts that I had. So that's actually the moment when I decided to become a designer.
What was it about Stockholm that was so inspiring? Like when you say these people or this city you think would like your ideas, what was the synergy there that you were sensing?
It was little things, just walking on this shopping street. I saw this guy who had a necklace, but it was tied around his wrist. And I just thought that was really creative. Like I knew it was a necklace and it was just the way that he had done it. And I remember seeing guys when I was at the clubs and they were the first ones, they were like showing their ankles. They had tapered pants. They might have even had some kind of elastic at the bottom, and then they'd have dress shoes on and you could see their ankles. And that was like I'd never seen that before, but I have to say I thought it looked awesome. It looked really cool and really fresh. Like they were still business and well dressed and presentable, but with a really cool forward kind of edge. So small things like that just kind of started registering, and that I've never forgotten.
And do you still think of small details like as you're, designing even now? Like it sounds like that's a bedrock value of Christopher Bates.
Exactly. Yeah, the details are really important. I think that's what differentiates, my products and my aesthetic from other brands. I start with the fabrics first of all. That's a really important detail. Okay, and then I think, what should this fabric become? Because I know now that I have experience, especially if I find a beautiful fabric, I'm like, oh, the drape of this, the feel, the weight, the functionality, this is going to be a trench coat. I just know immediately how it's going to look and feel. Like I have a 3D imagination. People have a photographic memory. I have a photographic imagination. Like I can see things in full detail. So that's part of it. And then I don't like to have too many competing things going on. And I think that's where a lot of designers and brands get lost is like, oh, what if we add this? And what if we do this? And what if we do this? My philosophy is actually the opposite. And it's a famous quote by Saint Antoine Exupery, who said, perfection is achieved not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. So that's my
Interesting.
approach, and it's not automatically minimal. It doesn't necessarily mean minimalism, like classic Jill Sander or something, which I love. But it just means don't have too many competing elements. The details become really important, and even smaller details. It can be something on the inside or the back, but it doesn't necessarily mean details that are in your face. So yeah, the details are a big part of my consideration for everything I design.
How did you decide? Because you did education post-secondary in British Columbia, your liberal arts as well as a marketing degree, and then you went to Italy. Was that your only like destination? Like, if I'm going to go study design, that's where it's going to be. Tell me about how your education has helped shape who you are and your brand.
Yeah. When I graduated from high school, I didn't know really what I wanted to do yet. So I went to university, started taking all different types of classes that I was just interested in. I didn't really have a set plan. I ended up working towards a Bachelor of Arts degree, and I graduated from UBC. And by that point, I really liked marketing, because it was a creative aspect of business. It was something that I was interested in and that I liked, and that seemed like a good career move. So I went to BCIT, a great business school. I studied marketing communications. I really, worked hard and was really into it. And then after graduating, I worked for a boutique marketing firm in Vancouver for 5 years. Now, this was still early 20s. So during this period was when I was traveling to Europe every summer and, as my vacation. And, it was during that period when, it all sort of dawned on me, what I had mentors actually. And I know this is something that we're going to talk about, but I had mentors from a young age. And one of the questions they asked me was, if you can do anything and not fail, what would it be?
Oh, that's a powerful question.
It is. It's a different way of framing it. It's not just like, oh, if you could do anything. It's like, no, there's more to it than that. So I really thought about that a lot. And, it hit me like a lightning bolt. Like I was working for the marketing firm, but I was 26 years old. I had just got back from Europe, and I'm thinking like, what do I want to do with my life? Do I want to do marketing? And the answer was no. And I knew that. And the next question was this, if you could do anything and not fail, what would it be? For me, it was like a lightning bolt. It's like, you've always wanted to be a designer. Like, be honest with yourself,
Yeah.
right? And so I knew that's what I wanted to do. Although I didn't know how to sew, I didn't know how to make patterns, and I was actually a terrible at drawing by hand. I was terrible. So there were some hurdles to be overcome.
It sounds like you were blessed with people in your life that encouraged you to trust your gut.
Yeah, very lucky in that respect. It's funny, like I remember telling people when I was serious that I wanted to do this. Like, no, I'm moving to Milan to become a designer. Um, and my mentors were like not surprised at all. And these are, kind of old fashioned German people that we grew up with. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that they weren't surprised. And it's like, no, they know me. They know, how much Europe means to me and creativity and things like that. So they weren't surprised. My mom as well, super supportive. I remember my boss at the time from the marketing firm, and she was like, Christopher, that industry will eat you up and spit you out. And I said, okay, thank you, Diane. Who I consider a dear friend and a mentor as well. Like God rest her soul. She passed
Mhm.
a couple of years ago, but she was a really important person in my life. And listen, it is a really tough industry. So what she said isn't wrong, you
For
know.
sure.
And I remember when I was starting out, I used to work with Adrian Fluvog, who's the son of John Fluvog. And we worked at the same bar when I was in university. And then I'm getting into fashion. So I call up Adrian. I'm like, hey, do you think I can talk to your dad sometime? I want to be a designer. So he very politely set up a meeting between me and his dad. And so John met me in Gastown in Vancouver. And the first thing he said to me was, how brave are you?
Ooh.
And I said, John, I have no fear. I'm brave. I'm gonna do this. And he was impressed, with my, I guess, bravado or whatever it was. But it's a really good question to ask, and it's something that now I speak with a lot of young people in the industry, and whenever they ask me about getting into it and doing what I do, I actually ask them that same question, because it's like, it is a really tough industry. And what I tell them is, you have to be tougher. You have
Yeah.
to be able to handle rejection. You have to believe in yourself. It is that tough.
I mean, I think for so many creative industries, fashion certainly in particular, you need a core of self-belief
Mhm.
that just will, keep you steady no matter what challenges, because God knows there will be, the valleys 10 times more than the hills, than the peaks sometimes,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like I just think you're so lucky to have had people to encourage you to develop that inner core of self-assurance.
Yeah, you're right. I would not be here where I am without, the support of the people around me growing up, the mentors and, everyone. It's huge, and I thank them. I mean, I tell them as well. So it's, I really do appreciate it. And I've used whatever knowledge that they've imparted to me.
Mhm.
I've used it. And I think, that's something that I hope, they recognize and appreciate, that, they weren't wasting their time with me, because I took it very seriously, even when I was a kid. And, maybe I seemed not so serious. I was just, I think it takes time for people to evolve.
Absolutely. What does a design school application look like for, someone in their mid to late 20s with, as you said, didn't know sewing, didn't know, wasn't a great sketcher? Like, how did you get from there into design school? Was it a fluke and it was just like one and done? Were there interviews? What was that process like for you?
That's a good question. I was intimidated to even apply to design school because I was so poor at drawing. I didn't have the typical skill set you need to enter the program. But a friend of mine who I used to work out with, he said, "Did you know that you can learn how to draw?" And I said, "No, I didn't actually know that. I always thought it was something people were born with or not." And I was not. Okay. And he's like, "No, there's a book. It's called like Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain or something."
For
And I'm like,
real?
"Okay, that's cool." So I bought the book. I did a couple exercises, but honestly, I didn't dig into it too much. What that book gave me was at least the confidence that I could learn. Okay.
Yeah.
So when I'm putting together my application, like I really played up my background in graphic design, because I had done some graphic design in school at BCIT. I did a program in that. And then part of my work with the marketing agency involved graphic design. Um, some I would do, some I would work with other designers, but I put that on the forefront of my application. I told them I was serious. I was a 26-year-old student, which is relatively mature for the program. And I just gave them, yeah, you did interviews like we're doing now. So we did virtual interviews because I was in Vancouver and I wanted to study at Marangoni in Milan specifically. So they realized I was serious, and I had done well at my previous business school, and they take all of that into account. And I'm glad that they gave me a shot. It was the school was a fantastic program, and it's genuinely given me what I needed to become a designer.
When you think back about, because I think, designers come to their professional career in all kinds of ways. Some are self-taught, some, go to design school early, some late. What do you think about your education was some of the like really important foundation building for the kind of business you've been able to build?
Well, I always felt like I had good ideas and lots of ideas. But what they teach you there is how to turn your ideas into reality, especially because I wasn't good at drawing. I did learn how to draw, by the way, and so now I can draw. And also, I use computers, and I'm good at using computers to draw. So now I'm able to communicate my ideas. But also, you have to learn pattern making and sewing so that you know what is actually feasible. Because fashion typically, like if you're doing pattern making as opposed to draping, with pattern making, everything starts as a two-dimensional flat piece of fabric. And then if you look at your body, it's a three-dimensional object. So how do you turn a flat piece of fabric into a three-dimensional object? It's actually fascinating and extremely difficult. So pattern making was like, oh my God, if I thought I didn't know how to draw, day one of pattern making, oh my God, like I was lost, but I managed to learn. So I would say, yeah, the school helped me turn my ideas into reality. That's part of it. But they also teach you fundamentals like about fabrics, about color palette, and about putting together a collection. Now, a collection is like a story, right? You can have evening looks, you can have day looks, you have a certain material and color palette, all of these things. And I think, if I didn't have that background, it my vision would have become too scattered. So it really helps you, focus and express what you want to express. Like they also told me, oh, well, you know, another challenge was the first day of school, my design teacher was like, oh, a bunch of new, designers coming through the door. Like the last thing the world needs is another fashion designer. That's what she said. And again, I thought that was brilliant. And I took it as a challenge. The first day of class, at the end of class, I stayed late. I pulled the teacher aside and I said, no, no, I'm serious. Like I'm here for a reason. I'm paying for it myself. Like this is a huge investment for me. And she pushed me. She pushed me the entire year. And I'm really grateful for that, because that's what the industry is actually like. So it was kind of a taste of what my future would be like. And it was tough. It was a lot of sleepless nights.
The advice is often to seek a professional degree in the market that you hope to work in so that you're networking within, contacts that will serve you when you graduate. And you're in Milan and you are living, in Vancouver and, you've bounced to Toronto. What was the strategy of going to Italy? Did you have that thought of always returning there from a market point of view, or were you more just this is where I'm inspired, this is where I'm going to go, and we'll see what happens when I'm done?
Yeah, like I knew I wanted to study it at Marangoni, because has a wonderful reputation. I researched all the best design schools in the world, and I chose that one. And I chose Milan specifically because I had never been to Milan, by the way. I'd been to Italy, but I've always looked to Italy and Milan as the mecca of fashion. Textiles and just fashion style. For me, that's Italy. Okay. So I knew I wanted to start there. And I would have liked to have stayed. Like I was there for my program. And then when the program ended, like my student visa expired. So my situation became a little bit complicated, because I did have opportunities to work, entry level, like really like an internship,
Yeah.
with a couple big brands. But I had to go back to Canada to do paperwork, and then come back, to Italy to get the process going again. And it was during that period when I was back in Vancouver that I started writing my business plan, and I started, working on my brand. I mean, that's why I went to school, was not to work for someone else, but it was to start my own brand. So even when I was in school, I was doing designs for my brand, and that's what I was presenting, to the class. Those are the clothes I was making. I was wearing the clothes that I would make. So, you know, once I finished my business plan, then another offer came in from a really great Italian brand, and I immediately said no. And then I'm like, wait a minute, like I should have thought about that for 24 hours. So I messaged them again, and I said, wait, let me think about it for a day or two, because this is a great opportunity. But still, after that time, I just felt like if I don't start now, like I don't know, 27, 28, I guess at this point. And when you're that age, you actually think you're kind of old, which sounds ridiculous now.
Right?
You're kind of, you're starting a new career, you're starting a new chapter, so it's intimidating because everybody else started when they were really like probably 21 or 22, and they're successful. So I did at the time, I remember feeling like scrambling, like I've got to get this going now. If I go work for someone else for a few years, that's, in some ways it will help me start my brand, but I'll also be 3 years behind starting my own company. So you're thinking like as a designer, you're thinking as an entrepreneur. And I decided to jump, to start. And I don't give that advice to other young people nowadays, because I think I did a little bit of work for a couple companies, but not enough. I think I should have taken minimum 1 or 2 years to learn within, another company before starting my own. But you can't turn back. So I did it.
Absolutely.
I'm doing it. You know.
Tell me about your decision to call your brand your name. Like that's something that, you put a lot of emphasis on is you chose your real name
Yeah.
for your label. Tell me about that.
True. Yeah, there's a story behind that as well. When I launched the brand, I wanted to call it Ultra, okay? Because Ultra, I did actually call it Ultra. It was Christopher Bates for Ultra, but really Ultra was kind of the title, and that was something that just meant a lot to me. It's a word from my childhood that just means super and awesome, and it's like kind of summarizes how I feel. Like I have a lot of energy and I'm positive, and that
And it's
word just sort of
aspirational. It's,
yeah, yeah, it's
yeah.
the best, right? So I launched the brand under that, Christopher Bates for Ultra, but and it really, like, I would say there was a niche clientele that really liked it and appreciated it and got it, but most people were just like, why don't you just use your name? You have a nice name, you know and you're the face of the brand and whatever. So, and I don't just mean random people, I mean buyers, I mean people
Yeah.
in the industry, I mean experts, as well as just regular people and customers. So I was also getting feedback from other markets because I was trying to sell my brand internationally right from the start. And I remember meeting with someone in London, and he's like, "Ultra is not a cool word here." And in Italy, the ultras are like super hooligan soccer fans.
Yeah,
So
not what you're going for.
no, not what I'm going for. And then, you can go out and buy a Samsung TV that's like ultra slim or ultra high res. Like the word ultra by that point had sort of been played out. So it didn't really express the potential for the brand, with someone like me behind it and involved. So I made the decision. It was my third collection to switch to Christopher Bates, and that was costly because I had already invested a lot in Ultra. I had my website, I had business cards and stickers and just all this stuff,
Yeah.
labels, all the labels for your clothes and things. And I had to change all of that. And when you're just starting out, my budget, I didn't have the money to really even make the transition, but I considered it essential. I remember buying my URL, ChristopherBates.com, for $400 off of someone named Chris Bates in the US, who I think was a photographer, but he didn't really use ChristopherBates.com. So I bought it for 400, but honestly, I didn't have that 400. I had sold two pairs of jeans to a client, and right away I turned around and put that money to buy the URL.
Yeah, direct
Uh,
money in from denim, money out for URL.
isn't it
Like,
funny? I mean, but
yeah.
that's really what it's like when you're bootstrapping and starting a company like this. So I remember vividly, yeah, Martin Element, a friend and a customer in Vancouver, bought a couple pairs of pants, and that's how I got the URL. I didn't have an extra $400 at that point.
I think for entrepreneurs, there's often forks in the road, like you're describing, where there's a decision and you either make that decision based on fear or like wacky trust because you just don't know how it's going to work out. What
Yeah.
like does that resonate for you? Like does that kind of fork in the road, is that something that you've had to do, more than just when you've I think it's every entrepreneur has moments like that. How do you process that in the moment?
Yeah, it's like sometimes you feel like you understand and know the landscape and the big picture, but that shifts. Every few years. It's like, oh my god, I thought I knew everything. I didn't know anything. So I've just sort of been, doing my best with the information available to me, trusting in my instincts, trusting in my experience, and overcoming challenges. And I think each time you do overcome a challenge, it you're more prepared for the next one, and you believe in yourself more. You've overcome hardships, so the next hardship that comes your way, you're ready to tackle. And that's confidence. That's how I would describe confidence. It's a real confidence. There's people with a false sense of confidence. I think that's better than not having any confidence. but
Fair.
but true confidence comes from overcoming challenges. So I've had to overcome a lot, and I know there's a lot more coming my way. So you mentioned fear. You can't let that creep into your psyche, because then you'll be paralyzed. And another thing about this industry and being an entrepreneur is you have to keep moving. You have to. It's better to keep moving, even if it's not the right decision. You're still moving towards the right decision. So you can't sit still. You've got to keep going.
You have a very cheeky, cool, sassy lipstick print on the collar of your shirts. When did you start using that, and how did that become something that became a stalwart part of your brand?
Yeah, that was early on. I think that was my fourth collection. So it was, yeah, a long time ago. There's just that famous story of, a guy coming home with lipstick on his collar and getting in trouble with his partner. And I thought, why hasn't anybody commercialized that before? So I had the idea for a while, and then I did a prototype in one of my first collections, and then I had an opportunity to do a runway show with Got Style. They did a show at Toronto Fashion Week featuring five different Canadian designers, and I was one of them. So we each had our own little vignette, section of the show. I think I had maybe six looks or something. And one of the looks, I included the Kiss collar. And, Fashion Week was a big deal back then. And, it was a
Indeed.
room full of, I don't know, 1,000 people or something. And
Yeah,
it
the big
really got
tents.
a lot of traction, and I remember after the show, people were like, "Hey, you're the lipstick collar guy or the designer." So it had that sort of stickiness, that you need, just to be different and to be recognized and to be remembered, because there's so many brands and people, going for your attention. Um, and it's, to me, it's just something sexy and humorous and playful. But it's been an important part of my brand. It's what I'm known for. I have so many great stories around it. I'll tell you one
Oh,
quickly.
yeah, do please.
Um, so I I sold a shirt to this gentleman, Tom, and the Kiss shirt, and then he wore it to an event the next week. And a week after that event, he messaged me and he said, "Thanks for the shirt. I met the love of my life, Tom." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then the same day, I got a message from Ildi, the woman he met. And Ildi said, "Thanks for the shirt. I met the love of my life, Tom." So what happened is, yeah, Tom went to the party wearing this Kiss shirt, and nobody had ever seen it at that point. And this woman like came up to him and is like, "What's that on your collar, you cheeky man?" And Tom's like, "Oh, hey, it's my buddy Chris's shirt, and whatever." And that's literally how they met. So I call the shirt like the ultimate icebreaker, because there's a lot more stories like that where someone, because mostly guys wear it, although over the years now women have really embraced it as well. But for guys, like if you don't have the confidence to maybe go across and talk to the woman that you're interested in across the bar, if you wear that shirt, like people will come up to you. So, it's really, a great kind of conversation starter.
Well, and I think it kind, not to sound hyperbolic, but I think it is this wonderful illustration of so many facets of like your marketing brain, your, like a bit of humor, the confidence, the be brave, but still within like your brand. Like it's kind of this moment of all of those elements of yourself coming together in this one moment within your brand that brings that all together in a really powerful way.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It is. It's all of those things.
And
You
who
know,
knew, right? Like you wouldn't have
yeah,
like
it's one of those things, and like I don't know that I'll have a better idea. Sadly, I mean, in my next collection coming out this spring summer, like I do have some new ideas that I think are quite sticky, but that is very very particular. And there's been other brands that have since copied it. I won't name names, and
no.
that is what it is. But I know that I was the first to commercialize it, so I'm proud of it, and you know, yeah, I'm glad that it's part of the brand. Some people want me to put it on everything, and I've really resisted that. I've experimented with it here and there on other pieces, but I don't want that to define me. It's an element, a brand element, but
Hmm.
by no means is it the brand. It's just a detail, like we talked about.
That sounds like your marketing brain knowing a little bit about the importance of boundaries of things. And the other part that I think of your journey that I think is so interesting is you've done a lot of really interesting collaborations, Air Canada, Lexus, Porsche, you've done licensing. How why did you want to bring those things into your brand apart from probably very practical, financial reasons? What were some of the other like what else were you thinking about when you decided to reach out and seek out these opportunities?
Well, in a way, like opportunities come to you, like with
Even
Air
better.
Canada, for example. Sorry?
That's even better.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with Air Canada, they did an RFP and they invited what they considered to be the top, I think 12 or 13 Canadian designers to submit. And I was lucky to be invited. And, I was in Milan at the time and I remember that night, not even sleeping. I was so excited. I'm like, Air Canada, like that's so
Come
cool. The
on.
uniforms, it's so iconic. And so I just, stayed up all night, putting all my ideas down on paper, and then, worked really hard on the RFP. I dropped everything. I worked for months. I hired additional staff. I invested thousands and thousands in prototypes that I didn't really have. But, I was fortunate to get that opportunity, and it was a fantastic experience. I'm really, proud of what we did, and they're still wearing the uniforms today, all these years later.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, so that was a really, it was an awesome experience. It was very international as well. I mean, we did award shows in the US, we did award shows in London. We won at both as well. So it was great for building my brand and international exposure. We did a lot of press, and I think, that led to a lot of people around the world learning about who I am and what I do. So yeah, it's great from a business building perspective and experience, like everything. So yeah,
It sounds like, I'm just thinking back to John Fluvog asking you if you were brave. And it sounds like there's still moments like that to me sounds like a story where you decided, maybe consciously or unconsciously, like to be brave. The lipstick on your collar was being brave.
yeah.
Does the what do you think is something like how do you keep that bravery alive? And what are you being brave about now?
I think it's probably in my DNA, to be somewhat adventurous and, not afraid of, a certain level of risk. I've always believed that fortune favors the bold, to steal a line from Alexander the Great. But those kind of lines and quotes and things that I share actually are really important to me, and they do motivate me, and I feel like they are part of my DNA. So I think that's the only way really to get noticed. You can't make everybody happy. I'm pretty comfortable with rejection. Every season when you have your new collection, you both love it, and there are parts of you that that's not perfect, but then you realize not everybody else knows that. They didn't know what your vision was. So how is it really? Is it still good? Is it strong? And most cases, yes. And then you take your collection, you invest, in shooting it, you put together the lookbook and line sheet. It's an immense amount of work and investment. And then you go out and you present it to, the world. Both I sell to stores, so you wholesale, you're selling to buyers, and then I also sell directly to consumer. And, there are some people who think what you're doing is whack. And in sometimes they're right. Like I look back on certain things and I'm like, what was I thinking? But I wasn't afraid to try it. And I think that's important as a designer, but I also think it's important as a customer. I remember myself growing up, like, you try something on that maybe the salesperson showed you that you wouldn't normally. And some of the time, you were right, like that isn't good. But sometimes you'd be really surprised, like trying a different color or a different silhouette or a different kind of combination. and then getting into it. So I think it's about not having a comfort zone really, and just you know your comfort zone is out of your comfort zone, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Once you get used to that, then yeah, other considerations like fear and caring what other people think, it just doesn't matter.
What keeps fuel in your tank, Christopher? Like what keeps you inspired?
I think my nature is I'm very ambitious and motivated, just generally speaking. My goal from day one has been to build an international brand. So, some people look at what I've done and consider that somewhat successful. But for me, I still feel like, okay, even though there have been some successes, I feel like I'm still at, here where I want to be, here. Like, I think you hear that from a lot of entrepreneurs, and maybe that's part of who I am. It's like I'm a designer, but I'm also an entrepreneur, right? I'm an
Yeah.
artist and I'm a businessman. I'm not one or the other. So having those kind of two things, that keeps you motivated in different ways, right? Like I appreciate, the art and the culture and things like that, but I also want to be successful financially, you know. I'm not just an artist and I'm not just a businessman. So yeah, I'm trying to find a happy balance between those two things, and that will keep you on your toes and keep you interested in all kinds of things.
How do you work it out when those two sides are not in agreement?
That's a good question. And it's like you're always walking that fine line. I don't really have the luxury of being a pure artist, let's say, because in that respect, you could just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Whereas when I design, it's strategic. There's like a methodology behind it. I think, okay, you know, this is something that I like. So you want to balance something that you like and the market likes. Okay. I'm not going to do something, just because the market likes it or just because I like it. I like to do things, that make sense. And, I guess you could consider me a little bit more of a commercial designer, like someone like a Karl Lagerfeld, for example. And I remember he said, there's nothing wrong with selling, little black dresses, right? He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, if I'm selling, it's a good thing. It's working, and he wasn't pushing, like, I'm not talking about fast fashion. Like, he's selling expensive clothes and it's working. I consider that to be successful. Now, I also appreciate, more avant-garde designers, someone like a Raf Simons or a Rick Owens, and they've also found a certain level of commercial success. But certainly when they were starting, I felt like they were, more avant garde than I've had the luxury to be. And I respect that. I appreciate it.
Christopher, this has been such a pleasure. Where's the best place for people to follow along if they want to learn more about you and the brand and keep an eye on all the things that are coming up for you?
Best place to follow along is Instagram. It's christopher.bates.official. And you can also check out my website, christopherbates.com.
And we'll link all those in the show notes below so people can click right on them.
Awesome.
Christopher, thank you so much. This has been pure pleasure and super excited to continue to follow to hear more about all the big things that are happening.
Thanks, Donna. I really appreciate it.